right, so today we're continuing in discovering your identity. This is part 9. This is part of the Covenant Community 101 series, but we're going to continue in discovering your identity, so at part 9. All right, and we're going to start as we have been doing with a quick recap. I know I was gone last week, so for some of you who need a quick recap. Of course, the people that will be listening to this next year in the series will be like, well, I just put the other CD down and pulled this next one out. There was no need for a recap. I mean, there's only 5 minutes between pulling the CD out and switching it. Well, some people had to wait a week to get this or 2. All right, so let's go through the quick recap here. So up to this point, and we're only going to go back a little ways from last week, we were in Isaiah. In Isaiah 56, we learned that near is Yahweh's deliverance, and that was through the Torah and Yeshua. Okay, we looked at that in Isaiah 56. We learned that the plan for the sons of the foreigners, the Nachar, who joined themselves to Yahweh, we learned about what those plans were, who joined themselves to Yahweh and keep the Torah. So we learned what the fate was of those who would join themselves to Yahweh and keep the Torah. And that was a tremendous prophecy of a future for them. There was a tremendous future for those that would come and decide to keep the Torah. We also learned that Yahweh would gather still others to himself besides those who were gathered to him, which sounded an awful lot like John 10:16, where Yeshua said, "Other sheep I have that are not of this fold." And so we saw the connections there. And by the way, that's what we've been seeing, haven't we, through the entire teaching series, that we're seeing more and more how what was said in the New Testament, in the Brit Chadasha, was absolutely being talked about in the TaNaK, in the Old Testament. And that if actually you had been very well versed in the Old Testament and then read your New Testament, you would have known and understood a lot differently maybe than you did not knowing the Old Testament, because you would have said, oh, that's what that Isaiah was talking about that. Or when we read other things in Genesis that was being talked about, or other things, in 1st or 2nd Kings or wherever we were, that's what that was talking about. Yeshua was talking about the same thing. And we're going to see as we continue and we finish with the prophets and then eventually get back to the New Testament and see the apostles' understanding of all this, you're going to see that they all understood this. We're going to see Rav Shaul or Apostle Paul talk about this. We're going to see Peter talk about this and John talk. We're going to see others talk about these same things because they were taught the foundation of what was prophesied to happen to Israel. So continuing as we're reviewing what we learned, in Zechariah, we moved from Isaiah to Zechariah for a second, and we looked in Zechariah 2 and in 8. In those 2 chapters, we learned that many Goyim would join themselves to Yahweh. Many of the Gentiles, many of those of the nations would join themselves to Yahweh, and that 10 men from all languages, they will take a hold of the edge of the garment, the kanaf, or the wings, the corner of the garment of a Yehudite, a Jewish man, because the Jew would have that reputation. The reason why would they do this is because the Jew had the reputation, because the verse says, because we heard that Elohim is with you. And so we understand that the Jews, that the Jews would have a reputation that Elohim is with them. Of course, Christianity doesn't always feel that way. And a lot of the Messianics don't always feel that way. Because after all, if you don't do everything exactly the way I do, then Elohim isn't with you. But there would be this understanding that Elohim is with them. Now, it didn't say, by the way, Messianic Yehudite. It just said Yehudite. Now, bear in mind that we're looking towards the Yehudites knowing that they are looking forward to Messiah. They're just having a hard time swallowing the Jesus that they've been offered. Okay? And once you came to understand Torah, you could understand why they have a hard time with that. Okay? Because after all, that name and that image is being used as different from Yeshua. That name and that image is being used to say that the law was done away with. The Torah, the thing that the Jews hold most precious, has been just tossed aside as if it was garbage. Actually, it's being tossed aside saying if you do it, you're mocking the death of Yeshua. That's what they say. And so why would a Jew be able to kind of be excited about that? Then in Isaiah chapter 11, which is where we are now, we're not finished with 11. What we learned so far in Isaiah chapter 11, and you can turn there, Yeshayahu chapter 11, because that's where we're going to start today. Okay? But we learned up to this point that Yeshua was to stand as a banner to the people, and unto him the Gentiles, the Goyim, would seek. We understood and we learned that he shall raise a banner, he, Yahweh, shall raise a banner for the nations, the Goyim, and gather the outcasts of Israel and assemble the dispersed of Yehuda from the four corners of the earth. Amen. So actually, you know what? As part of this review, let's go back and we'll read through chapter 11, verses 1, and then when we get to verse 13 and 14, 15, 16, that's where we're actually going to start. But let's just kind of get the context again where we are here in Yeshayahu, Isaiah, chapter 11. Verse 1, and a rod shall come forth from the stump of Yeshai, and a sprout from his root shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of Yahweh shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of Yahweh, and shall make him breathe in the fear of Yahweh. And he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. Actually, you know what? It just hit me. Just let me stop there in verse 3. He shall make him breathe in the fear of Yahweh. I don't think I've ever emphasized that point before when I've gone through this chapter. But in other words, the fear of Yahweh, the awe, respect, the reverence for Yahweh would be as natural and a part of him as breathing. See, we don't walk in this like we breathe. Sometimes we walk in this and we struggle with aspects of it. Now imagine how you would be in your life if you struggled to breathe. Some people do. So this was as natural to him as breathing. He breathed the fear of Yahweh. It was part of how so incorporated as a part of him. Verse 4, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor and shall decide with straightness for the meek ones of the earth, and shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth and slay the wrong with the breath of his lips. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and trustworthiness the girdle of his waist. And a wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and a leopard lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child leads them. And a cow and a bear shall feed, their young ones lay down together, and a lion eat straw like an ox. The nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the adder's den. They do no evil nor destroy in all my set-apart mountain, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of Yahweh as the waters cover the earth. The waters cover the sea. Now, stopping right here, let's remember, so what he's telling us is that this is all happening in the future. This is all happening in the future. This is not necessarily talking about Yeshua coming in the flesh. We don't have him in the flesh judging the peoples. He said, I didn't come to judge. He says, you don't have him doing that now. We don't see the wolf with the lamb and the leopard lying down with the goat, etc. We don't see that. We don't see that there's no more violence in the set-apart mountain. We don't see the earth being filled yet with the knowledge of... Now it's beginning to be filled with the knowledge of Yahweh. It's not filled. Because he says it's going to be filled as the waters cover the sea. In other words, everything will be covered with the knowledge of Yahweh. We're not there yet. And in that day, what day? The day when all of this is going on, there shall be a root of Yeshai standing as a banner to the people. Unto him the Gentiles shall seek, and his rest shall be esteemed. And it shall be in that day that Yahweh sets his hand again a second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left. Okay, so we talked about that a lot last week as well. Or last time, I should say. Okay, from Asher, from Mitzrayim, from Pathros and Cush, and Eliam, and from Shinar and Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall raise a banner for the nations and gather the outcasts of Yisrael and assemble the dispersed of Yehuda from the four corners of the earth. Okay, so this is where it's all coming together. This also is just like we read in Ezekiel 37, the coming together of the 2-6, which do come together when there will be one king to rule over both houses, and when they will no longer be two but be one kingdom. Now we get up to verse 13. This is where we left off, okay? And the envy of Ephraim shall turn aside, and the adversaries of Yehuda be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Yehuda, and Yehuda shall not trouble Ephraim. Okay, so this is what we're looking towards in the future happening. Let's follow this again. The envy of Ephraim shall turn aside. So Ephraim has some sort of envy. Okay, or those are envying Ephraim, whichever way you want to look at it. And the adversaries of Yehuda shall be cut off, and Ephraim shall not envy Yehuda. This is envying of Ephraim to Yehuda, and Yehuda not trouble Ephraim. So what is this all about? So we're going to pause here. Hold your place in Yeshayahu, but we're going to go to Luke 15. Okay, so what is this all about, this relationship that had been before this moment, the relationship had been this one of envy and troubling and sort of not a real great relationship between Yehuda and Ephraim. So let's go to Luke chapter 15. Luke 15, and we'll begin in verse 11. Okay, Luke 15. It said, and he said, this is Yeshua talking now, he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods falling to me. And he divided his livelihood between them. And not many days after, the younger son, having gathered all together, went away to a distant country, and there he wasted his goods with loose living. Okay, loose living. Now, so he went and did whatever he wanted to do, and he squandered what he had. Verse 14, and when he had spent all, there arose a severe scarcity of food throughout the land, and he began to be in need. And he went and joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to fill his stomach with the pods which the pigs were eating, and no one gave to him. But having come to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I am perishing with hunger? Having risen, I shall go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against the heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And having risen, he went to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against the heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring that fattened calf here and slaughter it, and let us eat and rejoice. Because this son of mine was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and is found. And they began to rejoice. And his older son was in the field, and when he approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And having called one of the servants, he asked what this meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf, because he received him back in health. And he, this is the other brother, was wroth, and would not go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. And answering, he said to his father, see, these many years I've been serving you, and I have never transgressed the command of yours. But to me you have never given a young goat, so I could even rejoice with my friends. But when this son of yours came, this son of yours over here, who has devoured your livelihood with whores, who slaughtered you slaughtered the fattened calf for him. Then he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all I have is yours. And we had to rejoice and be glad, for your brother was dead, and now he's alive, and was lost, and now he is found. Okay, so let's kind of break this down. This story, one may think, is about just mercy and compassion and forgiveness, and it is. But really, this is just another way of talking about Judah and Ephraim, the 2 houses, the 2 sticks, the 2 brothers. And so what we see going on here, it says that there was, now notice this, the younger one is Ephraim. Would you not agree that Judah is older than Ephraim? Okay? So the younger one, because this is through Joseph, the younger one is the one that goes out and just, this is the one that, remember, the Assyrians took the northern kingdom and took them out. He said, they just wanted to do things their way. They wanted to do what they want to do. Fine. So now they're the ones out there, quote unquote, playing with the pigs. Notice that the pig thing is actually brought in there to show, because this is Ephraim is out there, where the world is eating pork and dealing with pig stuff, and so is most of Ephraim. And so this is the younger brother. But we also have this, as he's coming through this process, we read this in other verses where it talked about, and they would remember me in the places that I've sent them. So he comes to realize and remember, wait a minute, I had a place that I belonged, that I messed up. And I need to teshuvah, I need to repent, I need to turn back and go back and restore that relationship, which is what the whole punishment of Ephraim was all about. To get them to what? To teshuvah, repent, and restore relationship. And you see that playing through this parable here. And so notice that they are hungry. Okay, the young man is hungry. And what do you do when you're hungry? When you're hungry, you seek, you ask, you knock, you need to find sustenance. And so we have verses that talk about there being at some point a famine of the word. And so here he's hungry. And when he's hungry, he's realizing, I need to be fed. And what has he been doing up to this point? I can take care of myself. I don't need anybody. And Abba said, fine, go ahead. And then let me know how that's working for you. And guess what? It didn't work for him. Because it can't. You, without your Creator, doesn't work. It may seem like it for a short while, but it just doesn't work. And he knows that, so he's patient. Go give it a shot. You'll see, and you'll be back. And of course, the stubborn ones who don't come back, well, they end up just dying in their rebellion. Because it was kind of a rebellion type of thing. Their mindset here was a rebellious mindset, not to stay and be in his father's house. So now here he comes. Now notice it says, and the father went to meet him along the way. It says, draw near to Yahweh and he will draw near to you. That's in James, I believe, chapter 5. Draw near and he will draw near. So here the son is drawing near. See how the verses all tie together? And then the father draws near. But the father didn't come chasing after him until he came back and drew near. This is, again, to learn the process of repentance and teshuvah. And by the way, if you also notice, he chose to cut himself off. The father didn't actually send him into exile here. Most of the time, we choose to cut ourselves off. So here's a son said, give me what's mine, and I'm going to go do what I want. He said, fine, go. See, one of the worst things that can happen is when the Father in the heavens lets you have your way. Okay, that really is. It could be one of the worst things that could happen to you. So he goes and he meets him and he takes care of him. But he still says to his father, he says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. Now, by saying I've sinned against heaven, what is he saying? He says, I've broken the Torah. I've gone against the instructions. I've sinned against the way things are supposed to be in this world, the way those in the heavens set it up to be. Now, I know the Father here is a metaphor for the Heavenly Father, but he's saying, I've not kept what came down from the heavens. So I've done things that are against Torah. And I've sinned against you. He said, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. That's the humility. This is Deuteronomy 8:2. I don't have that in my notes, but this is Deuteronomy 8:2. He was out in that wilderness, and it humbled him. It humbled him so that he can come back and show that it's actually in his heart to be obedient and submissive to his father. He humbled him. And so they're going to rejoice. But notice what he says here. The father says, do this because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he is found. What did Yeshua say? I've come to seek and save that which was lost. Is he just talking about people that are sinners? No. This was a son of the Father. He says, my son was lost. Now he's found his way back. The whole process that we have, I continuously keep making this point, even though it's open and available to true Gentiles, it's first and foremost a promise that was made to return the children of Elohim. That would be the children of Yaakov, called Israelites. Now, that doesn't make them any higher or any better, because you see, this one, it's just like what we learned about what would happen to Gentiles that would choose to come and become submissive to the Torah. Here is one, he said, look, I was out there playing with the pigs and I was doing all those things I shouldn't do, but he came back. And then the restoration was there. And what did the father do? Put a ring on his finger, put a robe on him and sandals on his feet and took care of him. Your Father in heaven wants to do that for you too, if you would turn back. Hopefully most of us have already done that. But now notice, this is where we're trying to get to from Isaiah. Notice the attitude of Judah, the older brother. See, Judah's not excited about all this, is he? Judah's like, but I've been here, I've been obedient, and by the way, it doesn't say it in the parable, but in being obedient, I've taken my blows, my abuse, I've been mocked, I've been ridiculed and spat on, while, hey, younger brother, you were out there just living it up. What Judah's not noticing, though, is that younger brother is much more miserable. Younger brother didn't have his father. Younger brother didn't have all those things that the father says, look, all that is mine is yours. You have all that. But your brother has learned that in squandering it, now he's got nothing. And somehow he had the light bulb go on enough to come back and lay at my feet and say, make me a slave, make me a servant. Anything is better than being out there to be with you. Being your slave is better than being my own man out here. Is that something you might want to think about? Being his slave, the Creator's slave, is better than being your own man out in the world or your own woman. Because, we have the verses, I don't have it here in the teaching today, but we have the verses that say that you are a slave to whom you serve. You weren't brought out of Egypt to be free from all servitude. You were brought out to serve the one true Elohim, the one true King. Of course, he's a benevolent King. He wants to give you everything, wants you to be happy and joyful and have every need met and have every problem solved, etc., wipe every tear away, which was not the case with Pharaoh or with Babylon or Caesar, but it's the case with him. And so here it's coming to that understanding, realization that I've been walking in this delusional place of thinking, I can handle all this stuff. I can do it. All I needed was some money and some funds and go make my way in the world. I don't need him. Well, just because you have wealth doesn't mean you stop needing him. But you know what he'll do? He'll take away the wealth. He'll see that you squander it so that you can learn if wealth is causing you the problem to think that you're, there are those who think they're blessed because of the wealth when it's not the wealth that's the evidence of blessing. But they misinterpret. They misunderstand. They're measuring the wrong measuring, they're using the wrong measuring stick. So they're getting the wrong things to show as their evidence. So we see here that in a sense, Ephraim envied Judah. Not right away, but at some point realized Judah's got all that stuff back at the house. I want that. I want that relationship. I squander all that. I was foolish, but let me go back there. And now Judah's like, oh, sure, now you want to be back in the family album. Now you want, see, Judah's not excited about you guys coming into the mix. You little Johnny-come-latelys. Well, I'm just speaking for Judah, not as a representative, but I'm saying that's the attitude. Like, oh, sure, it's like the parable of the worker that shows up last, gets paid the same as the workers that came all day, and then, the workers that were there all day are like, whoa, hold on, that's not fair. And the owner, the boss says, what do you mean it's not fair? You got paid what we agreed. So what's not fair about it? And so the father here says, you're with me always, and all I have is yours. That's always been the case. What's the problem? Just because I want to take care of him, it didn't diminish you. Judah's going to have that issue to some degree because Judah's been, quote unquote, the chosen people for so long, with the other 12 tribes, the other 10 tribes being missing, MIA out there scattered. It's going to be hard for them to share that understanding of relationship, to not have to think of themselves as being the one special, unique people. And so here, that's that. Now again, remember we're reading this from the idea of envying and giving grief. So Judah might tend to give grief to his younger brother, and the younger brother is envying the position of Judah in his standing in the house. So let's understand that whole idea about provoking to jealousy and other things. Like, you want to provoke Judah to jealousy, the only way to do that is to have what Judah has plus more, not less. Because Judah right now doesn't want anything you have. Because Judah thinks they've got it all. So you've got to show them that you have what Judah has, but you got also more. But if you don't even have what they have, what's there to be jealous of? That's the point. That's where we're at. Now hold this idea, and now let's go to Ephesians chapter 2. We're still talking about this provoking and this relationship and envying and this problem between Judah and Ephraim. See, Paul talks about this in Ephesians chapter 2. Okay, we saw Yeshua talk about it here in Luke, and now we're going to go to Ephesians chapter 2. And we're going to start in verse 1. He says, and you were dead in trespasses and sins in which you once walked, according to the course of this world, according to the ruler of the authority of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we all once lived in the lust of our flesh, doing the desires of the flesh and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, and also the rest. Okay, so let's understand that verses 1 through 3 is describing what? The younger son out there squandering his wealth, living like this. But this is a delusional place. Okay, we were dead in our trespasses. We walked according to the course of the world. We did all these things. And by the way, it's also describing, obviously, clearly those that are legitimate Gentiles. Which, by the way, we never need to go figure out which one you are or were. And it should be were, not are. Because you should now be Israel. And so it really doesn't matter what you were, but what are you now? Okay? So we see, hopefully, that this first 3 verses matches up with the parable of the prodigal son. And now we get to verse 4. But Elohim, who is rich in compassion because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, remember he said, my son was dead and now he's alive. Because he wasn't literally dead. Okay? But see the connection here? Being dead in our trespasses made us alive together with Messiah. By favor you have been saved. And raised us together and made us sit together in the heavenlies in Messiah Yeshua, in order to show in the coming ages the exceeding riches of his favor and kindness towards us in Messiah Yeshua. For by favor you've been saved through belief and not of yourselves. It is the gift of Elohim. It is not by works, so that no one should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Messiah Yeshua unto good works, which Elohim prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And I'm not going to go into this whole grace thing here. Go listen to the teaching on the search for the doctrine of grace. I covered Ephesians 2 very thoroughly. So let's just kind of move forward, though, to what's connected to today's teaching. He said, listen now. The important thing, actually, for that whole thing about favor or grace or whatever the translation says, is that you are created in Messiah unto doing good works. That was why you were created, to do good works. What are good works? Torah. Okay, if you're not sure what good is, listen to the teaching, Well Done, Good and Trustworthy Servant. Part 1 is the defining of the term good. All right. Now we get to verse, at the end of that verse says, which Elohim prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. These good works, Elohim prepared for us to walk in. So it's not just, I think it's nice to go walk, quote unquote, the proverbial old lady across the street. Okay? No, he provided in advance. What did he provide? The Torah. These are the good works. How to relate to him and how to relate to each other. How to relate to him and how to relate to each other. Okay, verse 11. Therefore, remember, now this is where we're going to see this whole relationship thing. Remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, made in the flesh by hand. So what he's saying is, remember, you once Gentiles in the flesh. Okay, saying, so you, Ephraim, or you true Gentiles, because remember, there are other verses that talk about that if you are born in the house, and then you are, quote unquote, of the circumcision, and walk like a Gentile, then your circumcision is now counted as uncircumcision. There are verses that talk about that, and we've read them in other teachings. But realize he's saying, look, you who are called by the Jews, you were called a Gentile. He said, at that time, you were without Messiah. You were excluded from citizenship of Israel, and you were strangers from the covenants of promise, having no expectation and without Elohim in the world. Now, the key word there is covenants of promise. The promise is made to who? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And by the way, when you keep reading about the grace here, for by favor you've been saved, what favor? The promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which it was by their favor, they received favor, and that they received promises because they merited it. So that, not that you merited it, but that they merited it. Now, this is really, it's important, okay? Give me a second. I just want to pull something up. It was going to be for next week, but I'm going to pull it up in this one. I think if I can find it quickly in Deuteronomy. 1 second here. Okay, in Deuteronomy chapter 9. Don't go there, but I'll just say this. Do not think in your heart, after Yahweh Elohim has driven them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness Yahweh has brought me in to possess this land, because it's because of the wrong of these nations that Yahweh is driving them out. It's not because of your righteousness or your uprightness of heart that you go in to possess the land, but because of the wrong of these nations that Yahweh Elohim drives them out, and in order to establish the word which Yahweh swore to who? your fathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now you shall know that Yahweh your Elohim is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people. So we're going to cover that again, possibly in next week, when we start looking at Romans chapter 11. But the point that we need to understand is that when we start reading about favor, for by favor you've been called, well, he promised Abraham he would do this. He promised Isaac he would do this. He promised Jacob he would do this. Now, so remember, because how do we know this? Because certainly there was no merit here on our parts. We were Gentiles in the flesh who were at that time without Messiah, excluded from the citizenship of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise, the promises made to the fathers, having no expectation and without Elohim in the world. That's a miserable place to be. That's a pretty horrible, awful place to be. But now listen, he says, but now, in Messiah Yeshua, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. For he is our peace, who has made both one, and having broken down the partition of the barrier, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, the Torah of the commands and dogma, so as to create in himself one renewed man from the two, thus making peace. Okay, so let's understand. Actually, let me read the next verse. And to completely restore to favor both of them unto Elohim in one body, through the stake, having destroyed the enmity by it. So now we're looking at two groups of people that have enmity. The problem is the enmity between the people, not the Torah. He has abolished in his flesh the enmity. Between who? Between both. Both who? The ones he was just talking about, the Gentiles and the Jews. The lost Israelites and the Jews, Judah and Ephraim. There's an enmity there. The same thing that was prophesied in Isaiah chapter 11. He said that's going to be no longer. No longer will they envy each other or trouble each other or cause a problem for each other. He says because Yeshua came to destroy that enmity. And the Torah wasn't the problem. They were the problem, the enmity that these two groups had for each other. He said to completely restore to favor both of them unto Elohim in one body. Both of them who? He's talking about two groups or two peoples, not Torah. He's not reconciling law versus law or law versus grace. No, he's talking about people. Can we agree? Okay, he's talking about human beings. Human beings that were without Messiah, excluded from citizenship, and human beings that were with and weren't excluded, that were in the covenants of promise. And he's trying to say, look, Yeshua came to bring them together so they can be one. So that they could be one. Now, listen to verse 17. And having come, he brought his good news, peace to you who are far off. Now again, the phrase far off is not Gentile related, it's lost Israelite related. It's an idiomatic phrase that you go into the TaNaK, you look at the prophets, they talk about those afar off. When it talks about those afar off, then that's always talking about Israelites that have been scattered. So he says, listen, he says, having been, he brought his good news, peace to you who are far away, who are far off, and peace to those who are near. Does that sound like the prodigal son? You had one that was near, and one that went afar off. He said, but I'm bringing peace to you. Now remember, when the son first came back, there wasn't instant peace. The one who was home said, hey, what's going on here? He's been gone doing whatever he wants. He comes in and right away, boom, you're putting a robe on him and making a big feast and all that stuff. You know, there's another verse that talks about if you do what's expected of you, you're a useless servant. That's kind of what Judah was being told here. He says, look, you've been with me always. You've always had all this stuff. And he's like, yeah, but you never gave me a fatted calf even to hang out with my friends with. And you haven't, because you've been plodding along, but you have only been just plodding along, doing what you need to do. You haven't gone above and beyond. Because you were not appreciating what you had, but you stuck it out because you knew it was the right thing to do. Whereas your brother didn't appreciate what he had and he left. But now he appreciates what he had and he's back. He's got a whole different attitude than you do. He really appreciates what you have. That's why he came back. Now, sure, he didn't appreciate it. That's why he left. And so we have this enmity thing. Then he goes, listen now. So now what is the good news? He has brought us as good news, peace to you. So the good news has to do with the restoration of the two houses. The good news is that he's destroyed the enmity between the two houses. The good news is that he's reconciling the two together to make them one. This is the good news. Now, how did he do it? He did it having destroyed the enmity through the stake. When he was crucified and then resurrected. That was the reconciliation there. Because again, the casting out of Israel, the I divorced them type of thing that the Father said, I had to put them away. He said, I put them away, I cast them out. Well, then we needed to have the reconciliation through the death of Yeshua to bring that about. So here we have this going on. So this is the good news. It says, verse 18, because through him we both who? Jew and Gentile, Jew and lost Israelite. Through him we both have access to the Father through the Ruach, by one Spirit. So then, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the set-apart ones and members of the household of Elohim. This is still talking about people. It's not, people use Ephesians to say, well, that's why the law was done away with. The law was the problem. The law. No. You were without the law when it says you were dead in your trespasses, which you once walked according to the world and not according to the law. Chapter 2 and verse 1 and 2. It says, now, the enmity that's there between you has been abolished so that you can now embrace the law equally, both of you, and receive the same blessings and receive the same safety and the same transformative benefit of being turned from what you are into what he is. That's not just available just to one group or the other. It's available to both. Because I'll tell you what, the Christians and the Jews agree on one thing. I don't know about anything else, but certainly one thing. Torah is not for you. They do. The Jews and the Christians absolutely agree on this one thing, that the Torah is not for you. And what is this saying? That was happening even in Paul's day, in Shaul's day. He said, look, no, this enmity has got to stop, because Paul ran into this all the time. You see this in Acts 15. Hey, why are you letting these Gentiles in? What are you doing with these uncircumcised people, letting them in? There was an enmity there. We don't even understand and appreciate historically what the enmity was between Judah and the northern kingdom when they assimilated, when they became like the nations that took them over, and they compromised and they became Hellenized and all those other things that were happening. So you think there was a problem between a Jew and a Gentile. The Jew and the Israelites that were no longer walking the walk, there was an even bigger angst or enmity between them. And Paul's dealing with these things. He says, look, you are fellow citizens if, listen verse 20, because you have been built upon the foundation of the emissaries and prophets, Yeshua Messiah himself being the chief cornerstone. Now, you can't be built on that if you're not keeping the Torah. Because that's all those guys came to talk about is, hey, wake up, keep the Torah. Obey your Heavenly Father. Obey the commandments. Guard them, keep them, remember them, observe them. Cling, cleave, hold fast to them. He says, look, in whom all the building being joined together grows into the set-apart dwelling place of Yahweh, in whom you are all being built together into a dwelling of Elohim in the Spirit. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. This is what's going on in that two little verses in Isaiah when we read just the one verse, verse 13. In verse 13 of chapter 11, it says, look, Ephraim shall turn aside, and adversaries of Yehuda be cut off, and Ephraim shall not envy Yehuda, and Yehuda shall not trouble Ephraim. And you think, oh, that's just like one verse that Isaiah mentioned. But it was important enough for Yeshua to give a parable about it. Paul to write about it in multiple places. We're reading the one in Ephesians now. We'll read some of the other ones later. And so this is a very, very big point. And yet Isaiah prophesied that in that day, going forward to Yeshua, and then into ultimately the time when Yahweh will be known and the knowledge of Yahweh will fill the whole earth and cover just like the water covers the sea, in that day, there will be no more of this nonsense. We're still having that nonsense today. We're not there yet, are we? You see the anti-Semitism all over Facebook, all over YouTube, in the Messianic, in the Hebrew roots, all over the place. The anti-Semitism is still there. What is the anti-Semitism? A problem between Ephraim and Judah, or the Gentiles in Judah. And I'm never going to tell you that all Gentiles are Ephraim. There are groups out there doing this. It's wrong. But what it's saying is that, in essence, Ephraim is looked at as Gentile because of what Ephraim has been doing. So they got it backwards. Instead of thinking that all of the Gentiles are Ephraim, it's really that the Ephraim is looked at as Gentiles. You see, but the problem is almost all of you came out of a church system, and there's groups of people that teach this. They want to believe that the church somehow is not problematic, that the church somehow is Ephraim, that the church is just the other stick waiting to be joined together, and that's just not true. That's just not true. Now, are there a lot of Ephraimites in the church? Yes. A lot of Jews in the church. A lot of everything. It's 1/3 of the planet. Whatever's out there is in the church. Are there gay people in the church? Yes. Homosexuals? Yes. Are there murderers in the church? Yes. Are there pedophiles in the church? Whatever there is, it's 1/3 of the planet. They're in the church. So it's not a judgment on the church. It's just 1/3 of all people that exist. Whatever you can name, they're in the church. So let's not try to label that the church is this or that group. It's not. It's a mix of everything that's out there, of people claiming to be in that whole thing. But we have that problem. All right, so now let's go back. Hopefully we're seeing that the problem that was abolished, because, excuse me, you guys get Ephesians 2 thrown in your face all the time. What was abolished? The enmity. It even says, he says that he restored to favor both Elohim in one body through the stake, having destroyed the enmity. He didn't destroy the Torah. The Torah was never the problem. As a matter of fact, if you had read this and had already read everything in the TaNaK 57 million times, so you knew the TaNaK inside and out and backwards, the one message, maybe I'm wrong about this. If you read from Genesis to Malachi or 2 Chronicles, depending on your Old Testament, the one thing you should get out of it from cover to cover is that the Creator wants us to do what He said. I don't see how you can get any other message. If I had to ask you, give me one point, one message for that whole beginning to end, Genesis to the end of the Old Testament, the end of the Old Testament, what's the one message? Do what I say, and everything will be great. I think that's the message. If you would just do what I say, everything will be fabulous. And so now you're going to read this and tell me that the problem was the Torah? No. The problem is, it says the law of commands and dogma, and actually putting the word Torah in there is not the way it says. Ephesians in this translation shouldn't have the word Torah. It's the word law there. What is the law of dogmatic things? The Jews in their laws had laws to put out and treat as dogs the Gentiles and Israelites that were not keeping Torah. The enmity, there was actually signs by the temple saying, no Gentiles, no dogs, they were kept on the same level. That enmity was destroyed. That's why Shaul was trying to talk now to a mixed audience in Ephesus. The Ephesian group is a mixed group. So the enmity between the people, not the law itself. The law reconciles. When Yahweh wanted to bring the people to Him, He pulled them out of Egypt and handed them His law. And then it says things like, what people is it that are this near to Yahweh that He would give them His law personally? But yet people use Ephesians 2 for that other purpose. This is horrifying. Okay, let's continue back now in Isaiah chapter 11. Okay, Isaiah chapter 11. And I think we're only going to get finished with this today. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 14, but they shall fly down upon the shoulder of the Philistines towards the west. Together they plunder the people of the east, their hand stretching forth on Edom and Moab. The children of Ammon shall be subject to them, and Yahweh shall put under the ban the tongue of the sea of Mitzrayim, and He shall wave His hand over the river with His might of His spirit, and shall smite it in the 7 streams, and shall cause men to tread in its sand. Okay, that's very prophetic, very colorful language. We're not going to solve that puzzle today. It's verse 16 that I want to get to. So after this envying and no longer striving and no more troubling, we get to verse 16. And there shall be a highway for the remnant of His people, those left from Asher, as it was for Israel in the day when they came up out of the land of Mitzrayim. And there shall be a highway. The Hebrew there is a word that can mean highway or path. It's even used for like railroad tracks. So it's kind of a straight kind of path for the remnant. as it was for Israel when they came out of Mitzrayim. Okay, so what was it that they had when they came out of Mitzrayim? He brought them out, and they brought them where? To Sinai to receive the path. This is the path. This is the way. So there's a highway that is provided. So my brain, connecting with the Ruach, hopefully, was triggered with the idea of the verse that says, this is the way, walk in it. A path or a way is provided. Let's look at that in Isaiah chapter 30. Just go a couple of chapters over. We're going to read verse 1 for context here. Okay, woe to the stubborn children, declares Yahweh, to make counsel, but not from me, to devise plans, but not of my spirit, in order to add sin to sin. Okay, so this is describing us. Israel, all throughout the ages, has always been a stubborn people. And what do? We seek counsel from everybody but who we should. We ask everybody else who's doing the same dumb things we're doing, and we get counsel from them. Instead of going up the chain of command, looking to the leadership and getting counsel, or looking to the word and get counsel. No, you want to ask your friend who knows just as little as you do or less. That's what we do. It's foolishness. Now go to verse 8. Is that where I want to go? Yeah. And go write it before them on a tablet and inscribe it on a scroll, that is for a latter day, a witness forever. So this is now what he's saying. This is for the latter day. He's talking to the stubborn, rebellious people. This is for the latter day. That this is a rebellious people. I should go backtrack a second. When it says latter day, that means us or later. In other words, it means this has not happened then, and as we read it, we'll see it hasn't happened yet. Latter day is still pointing to that time at the end, at the very end. He says, this is a rebellious people, lying children. Children refuse to hear the Torah of Yahweh. Oh, obeying that Torah is pretty important. Who say to the seers, do not see, and to the prophets, do not prophesy to us what is right. Speak to us what is smooth. Prophesy deceits. Turn aside from the way. Swerve from the path. Cause the set-apart one of Israel to cease from before us. He says, and there shall be a highway for the remnant. But the highway has to be embraced by the remnant. He's saying, no, you guys don't want the path. He says, you want to swerve from the path. You want people to teach you smooth things because you don't like what you're hearing. And that's where we talk about being correctable or not. Most of us are not because we don't like what it sounds like. We don't want to be told. We don't want to have to deal with our stuff. So we want to find people that are going to teach us smooth things. So what do? You have a question, and what do? You go on YouTube, and you type it in, and you find teachings on that question. And then you listen to the first one, and you don't like it, so you go and get a second one. And you keep listening until you find one you like. Isn't that interesting? And don't tell me you don't have to raise your hand. Don't tell me you never did this. But you start looking for a teaching that matches what you like. A lot of us do that. Don't do that. You're looking for those smooth prophecies. He says, look, therefore, thus said the set-apart one of Israel, verse 12, because you despise this word and trust in oppression and perverseness and rely on them, therefore this crookedness is to you like a breach ready to fall, a bulge in a high wall whose breaking comes suddenly and swiftly. And he shall break it like the breaking of the potter's vessel, which is broken in pieces, without sparing, so that there is not found among its fragments a shard to take fire from the hearth or to take water from the cistern. For thus said the Master Yahweh, the set-apart one of Israel, in returning and rest you are saved. In stillness and trust is your strength, but you would not. Now let's talk about Ephesians chapter 2 and what brings salvation. He says, look, in returning to what? To Torah. In returning to Yahweh, to Torah, and rest. Resting from what? All your busybody busyness trying to figure out what you want to figure out for yourself. And trust. In stillness and trust is your strength. Slow down, sit still, and listen. But you would not. And you said, no, for we flee upon horses, therefore you flee. And we ride on swift horses, therefore those who pursue you are swift. 1,000 flee at the rebuke of one, at the rebuke of 5 you shall flee unto you until you are left as a pole on top of a mountain and a sign on a hill. That's, by the way, the Deuteronomy 28 cursings, isn't it? Okay? Because it says in the blessings, only a few of you will chase away hundreds and thousands of them, and then the cursing is the other way around. And therefore Yahweh shall wait. And therefore Yahweh shall wait to show you favor. If favor is unmerited, why is he waiting? They certainly sound like a bunch of people that don't merit anything. So if favor is unmerited, why is he waiting to show them favor? Because he's waiting for them to merit the favor or be ready to start walking in merit. He says, therefore he shall be exalted to have compassion on you, for Yahweh is an Elohim of right ruling. Blessed are all those who wait for him. For the people, excuse me, I want to just make sure how far I want to go, to 21. For the people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem, you shall weep no more. He shall show much favor to you at the sound of your cry. When he hears, he shall answer you. So now what's happening? The prodigal son. He's sitting there starving to death. He blew everything. He did his own counsel, listened to the smooth things, and now he's crying and miserable. And he says the father hears that. Because that's when you're being broken. Okay, you're now finally going through that breaking, through that fire of breaking, so that he can now remold you into what you're supposed to be. Verse 20, though Yahweh gave you bread of adversity and water of affliction, your teacher shall no longer be hidden, but your eyes shall see your teacher. So there's the teacher who's there. Who's the teacher? Yeshua, the Word, the Torah. But somehow your eyes were closed to all that. Remember we talked about he gives the eyes to see and the ears to hear to whom and when he chooses. He says, but your eyes shall be open. You'll see your teacher, and your ears hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it whenever you turn to the right and whenever you turn to the left. This is the way, walk you in it. There shall be a highway or a way for the remnant of his people, as it was for Israel in the day when they came out of Mitzrayim. When they came out of Mitzrayim, what did they follow? They followed a cloud and a fire. They followed the Word made flesh. They followed before he was made flesh. They followed, because it says that Paul says, and that rock that they followed in the desert was Yeshua. They had to come back to that. So a way, a path was made for the remnant. He says, look, you're going to hear that teacher. You're going to see it saying, look, this is the way. Don't just understand it. Walk in it. It's not information. We talk about knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is power. There's nothing to the Torah if you don't do it. It's got no power, no effect, nothing. You have to do it. When you do it, then there's something to it. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 5. We're still talking about the same thing here. This is the way, walk in it, and not turning aside from the left to the right. It wasn't something unique to Isaiah here. Moses is telling us this in Deuteronomy chapter 5, through Yahweh's telling us. Okay, so here we are. We just had the recounting of the event of the giving of the commandments, the 10 commandments, the 10 words. So Deuteronomy chapter 5, he just finished in verse 20 with you do not bear false witness, right? That's the 10th commandment, and you do not covet, right? 9 and 10 right there. False witness 9, covet is 10. Now listen to verse 22. These words Yahweh spoke to all your assembly in the mountain from the midst of the fire, of the cloud, and of the thick darkness with a loud voice. And he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. And it came to be when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, whilst the mountain was burning with fire, that you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and said, see, Yahweh our Elohim has shown us his esteem and his greatness, and we have heard his voice from the midst of the fire. Today we have seen that Elohim speaks with man, and he lives. And now why should we die? For this great fire is consuming us, and we hear the voice of Yahweh or Elohim anymore, then we shall die. Now what are they talking about there? They heard the 10 commandments. What did we tell you in the baptism of fire teaching? What did we tell you that fire represents? Fire represents the trials that test to see what you're made of. And they're sitting there going, okay, I gotta not steal, I can't covet, I can't murder, I can't. These are people that have been living in a very pagan world where these things were normal, everyday things. And they're saying, look, if we listen to more, certainly we're going to die. Yeah, that's after saying that we know that man can listen and live. But now they're saying if we keep hearing it, we're going to die because certainly we can't do all these things. After all, it goes against the stuff we'd rather do. Now listen to what he says here. He goes, For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living Elohim speaking from the midst of fire as we have and does live? You go near and hear and all that Yahweh our Elohim says and speak to us all that Yahweh our Elohim says to you, and we shall hear and do it. See, I think they were building in a level of plausible deniability. Hey, well, Moses said it, not you, and we didn't know we could believe him, And Yahweh heard the voice of your words when you spoke to me. And Yahweh said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people which they have spoken to you, and they have done well in all that they have spoken. No, he's not saying that he was glad they did it and it was right. He said, yes, these people are not ready to hear from me directly. So we are going to do it this way. He says, go say to them, return to your tents. Excuse me, let me go back. He said, I've heard they've done well. Verse 29, oh, that they had such a heart in them to fear me and to guard all my commands always. See, he knew they didn't have that yet. Oh, that they would have such a heart in them to fear me and guard all my commands always, so that it might be well with them and with their children forever. So that's why Yeshua came, to wipe out the commandments, because they're awful. That verse is in everybody's Bible, I'm sure. He says, look, if they would just fear me and guard my commands, it would be well with them and their children forever. Go say to them, return to your tents. But you stand here by me and let me speak to you all the commands and the laws and the right rulings which you are to teach them, and they shall do them in the land which I am giving them to possess. And you shall guard to do as Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you, and do not what? Turn aside to the right and to the left. This connects up to Isaiah talking about, and you shall hear your teacher telling you, do not turn to the right or to the left. He says, walk in all the way which Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you, so that you live and it be well with you, and you shall prolong your days in the land which you possess. So you're going to walk along the path or the way which Yahweh has taught you. Now, I can't ignore the fact that this gives me an opportunity to go to Deuteronomy 10:12. So we'll do it. Because that's my other little favorite verse there. And now, Yisrael, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you but to fear Yahweh your Elohim? He just told us that. Oh, that they would have such a heart as to fear me. So he's asking for us to fear him and to what? To walk in all his ways and to love him and to serve Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being. To guard the commands of Yahweh and his laws which I command you today, which are for your good. Now, I know that there's a question mark in the Scriptures version. I have no idea why that's there. There are no question marks or punctuation in Hebrew anyway. No, what Moses is saying, look, you are to guard the commands of Yahweh and his laws that I command you today because they're for your good. So you can just take that question mark right out of there. It doesn't belong. I don't know what other translations have or not in that verse, but there's no question marks in Hebrew. So it's not there. He says, this is what you need to understand. He says, look, see, the heavens and the heaven of heavens belong to Yahweh, your Elohim, also the earth with all that's in it. And Yahweh delighted only in who? Your fathers, to love them, and he chose their seed after them, you above all peoples, as it is today. And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your necks no more. This is still the same thing that was going on in Isaiah. Isaiah was talking about, and there shall be a highway or a path for the remnant of his people. What is the highway? As it was when they came out of Egypt. Where did they go from Egypt? To Mount Sinai, where they received the Torah. So what's the path that's being given as was in the day for the remnant? The path is that you're now getting access to Torah. You had no idea it was important, relevant, needed, that it would bless you, keep you safe, change you into what Yeshua is. You didn't know any of that stuff when you were sitting in your Christian church or when you were in the world. You didn't know that. But now as a remnant of his people, the way is being shown to you. You're now getting to hear your teacher telling you, do not turn to the right or to the left. You're seeing that there's a path you're supposed to walk on. By the way, we do have a teaching called Walk in All His Ways. You can listen to that one. Okay, that's like 4 parts or something like that. Okay, walk in all his ways. And so this is the critical place that we're at right now. We are coming to this understanding through Isaiah, and this is going to really complete where we are with the prophets as we're rounding up our journey. Remember, we went through the fathers, and then we went through the splitting of the kingdom, and now we went through the prophets to understand that this is all a part of Yahweh's plan to fulfill a promise he made to a guy named Abram before he even had his name changed, where he said, you will one day be the father of many goyim, many Gentiles, many nations. Through this whole process of knowing that they would be stiff-necked, knowing that they would be rebellious, knowing that they would be eventually punished and taken into captivity and scattered, then knowing full well that he would eventually regather them from everywhere that they were scattered, and in that process, everyone would get to hear the message. And there would be that, where it says that if at all possible, it's Elohim's desire that if at all possible, all men could be saved. All men would be saved. So there has to be a process for that. And that's why he said to Rehoboam, he said to Rehoboam, he said, don't go against Jeroboam. He said, this split, this division is of me. In other words, it's going to serve my purposes, not because I wanted the division. I knew this would happen, and I already know where it's going, and so this is going to serve my purposes. Leave it alone. I know if you leave it alone what's going to happen in the next 4,000 years or whatever. I know what's going to be going on. I've already seen it. This is of me. It's going to eventually serve my purposes. And so we have to understand and embrace these things. So hopefully this is making a lot of sense as we're going to kind of close here with the prophets. Next time in part 10, we're going to go into that the apostles, what the apostles knew about this and how they knew and they understood the prophecies of the restoration. They understood what Yeshua taught about it. And we're going to start to bring this thing full circle back to where we started, which was in the Brit Chadasha. And then we're going to finally close up with going back to some of the things that we started with that Yeshua said that made us go, and show that, oh, that makes more sense now that we went through this journey. So with that, let's go ahead and pray as we close. Father, we want to come before you. And Father, we're excited about the day when Ephraim shall not envy Yehuda anymore and Yehuda shall not trouble Ephraim. Father, we're excited about you coming out and embracing us like the prodigal son. And if those of us of Judah, that we would appreciate that we've always been there and not take it for granted. That, Father, that we could understand what it was that Yeshua abolished, that it was the enmity. And that, Father, that we could embrace that there is a path, there is a highway that you provided for the remnant of your people, and that we are to walk in it, that this is the way and we are to walk in it. That we're not to turn aside to the right or the left, but to walk in all the ways that are your ways as you commanded us to do. So, Father, we understand and appreciate these things. We also understand that it's not in our nature. It's our nature to seek the smooth. It's in our nature to be stiff-necked and rebellious. It's in our nature. And, Father, help us to get that self-sovereign, that nature that's in man, the spirit of man subjugated completely to be squashed and buried so that we could only be walking in your spirit, Father. So, Father, we come before you now, understanding more and more that your desire, identity-wise, your desire is us to embrace our identity as Israel. To understand that it's your desire that all your people, whether born Jewish or Ephraimite or Gentile or whatever other labels we can put, that your desire is that all eventually come to the knowledge of you, the one true Elohim, and become a part of the commonwealth called Israel. So, Father, we thank you, we praise you, and we just appreciate so much the revelation and the understanding that comes from you. As we come before you now in the authority of the soon-coming King of all Yisrael, your Son, our Savior, our High Priest sitting at your right hand, Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen ve'amen.